Que lo que mi gente, welcome to the Monoplaza F1 podcast. As always, I'm your host, Emir, and today we are going to be covering the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Yes, we finally come to it, the last race review for the 2024 F1 Formula One season. Wow, yeah. Hey, before I get started, yes, it's just me today. That's all right. It's okay. I think it'll be okay. Before I get started, please, comment, like, subscribe on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you enjoyed it. Any comment that you leave, obviously, is good for the visibility of the channel. Just a little spiel or spiel. I don't know how you say that. Before I get started, but if you are subscribed and you leave comments and you do share, then thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate that. All right. Um, I am feeling a little bit under the weather, so this episode, aside from the fact that it's just me, is probably going to be really short. It's going to be really short. I'm gonna just keep it a beam with y'all. All right, it's it's going to be so short. First, congratulations, McLaren. Yeah, let's get right into it. So for the first time in 26 years since 1998, which by the way, I can't believe that 1998 was 26 years ago. That's wild. Not since Mika Häkkinen and David Coulthard has McLaren won a constructors championship. And so congratulations to Lando Norris. Congratulations to Oscar Piastri. Congratulations to Andrea Stella. And of course, Zach Brown, which by the way, before the race started, I thought it was a little bit weird. They had like the publication photograph or whatever. It was like Zach Brown taking a picture with Fred Vasseur, and the constructors trophy was between each of them, and I was like, that's weird. Zach Brown, sir, you are not the TP. So the only, like, it's weird unless of course like Andrea literally was like, nah, I don't want to take this picture. I think this is whack. And then in that case, yeah, shouts out to Zach Brown, I guess. Yeah, shouts out, excuse me. But yeah, as the race started, I'm not gonna hold y'all. I thought McLaren was screwed. Many, many of jokes has been made this season with regard to Lando Norris's uh, pole to win ratio. Let's say that. Basically, the running joke this season obviously has been you put Lando in P1 to start the race on pole. By the first turn, he's P2, P3, P4. Basically, will have lost it. And that reputation preceded Lando. And so I thought surely Ferrari was going to catch up to them. Obviously, as the race started, it was Lando P1, Oscar P2. I think Maximilian Verstappen was at P3. But yeah, when it started, Lando got a great launch. Awesome. Perfect. What was weird and what was telling and what made me think like, okay, they are screwed. Their SOL was when Max Verstappen decided to take Oscar Piastri dancing, and basically both of them, basically Oscar was taking the turn. Max was right there with him. They bump into each other. Both cars do a synchronized spin. Carlos Sainz goes in between both of them. George Russell capitalizes. At that point, just to be again real honest with y'all, I thought, okay, so, and I think I sent out or I posted about this on Blue Sky. Basically, the fate of McLaren and their championship or constructors championship hopes were on the shoulders of Lando Norris. And again, just being completely honest with y'all, I I had little faith. I had little faith that Lando. All right, I'm sorry, and it's not even that I'm like a huge hater at this point. It's just like I thought the proof was in the pudding. There's no way Lando could have finished P1. He would have found some way to mess us up. McLaren, with their awesome strategy this year, would have found a way to mess us up as well. What have you? Whatever, insert whatever excuse. But I have to give it. And give props to Lando Norris. Uh, Plot twist, spoiler alert, he was able to hang on. McLaren did some great strategy. And literally all Lando had to do was finish in P1 and prevent a Ferrari from finishing in front of him, which is what they did. And so McLaren won. Unfortunately, I think Oscar had a terrible, terrible start of the race, obviously through no fault of his own. And like, not only that, he ended up getting like a 10-second penalty for what I thought was like the dumbest thing. He rear-ended Franco Colapinto, which I'm not sure how or why that happened. Frankly, like I didn't go back to look at it, but it was just kind of like, what? And so Oscar obviously was able to climb back up to the points. I think he ended up P10. And it's my show, so I'm going to go ahead and check that just to confirm. But I'm pretty sure he ended up P10, which is great considering that the way he started the race was, yeah, Oscar P ended up P10. So he did get a point to finally finish the season. And by the way, became the first McLaren driver in a really long time, and the first since Max Verstappen in I think 2023. So I think last year, basically, Oscar completed all the laps race. So he joins Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen as one of the few drivers who has completed every single lap in a Formula One season. Now for Oscar, it's an even greater feat because he completed more laps than any of the previously mentioned people, right? Like because the season's longer. So of course it's bound to happen. Um, but again, yeah, I I am I am happy that McLaren won. Ultimately, when they realized that the World Drivers Championship was out of reach, the messaging out of the team was like, "Well, that's not really our focus. BS, whatever." Um, but I'm glad that McLaren was able to do it. They couldn't get it done in Qatar, so it extended and it went down to the wire. But again, ultimately, when the race started, I thought McLaren had it in the bag. When Max and Oscar did a simultaneous pirouette or a synchronized pirouette, I thought they were SOL. But again, giving credit where credit is due, congratulations, McLaren. They celebrated. And by the way, post race, when they were up on the podium, they got their medals, they got their trophy, they got the constructors. Please go back and watch Zach Brown celebrate. My man was unhinged. He was pouring one out for the dead homies. He was spraying everybody. It was actually kind of hilarious. So yeah, go back and watch that. So congratulations to McLaren. We'll see what happens to them next year. Obviously, they are um, poised to continue their progress from this year to last year. They're probably the most strongly poised team in terms of engineering and technical aspect. From a driver standpoint, obviously, they have to contend with different driver pairings and the fact that all of the teams will have now caught up with the regulations and that this will be the last year of the ground effect regulations. Thank God. Um, yeah, before 2026 comes into play. So we'll see. I do think that McLaren next year will be able to continue the success. Now, whether Oscar Piastri will surpass Lando Norris, I think it's probably too soon to tell. I love Oscar. Feels a little too soon to say that he will be ahead of Lando next year, but I would love nothing more than to be wrong about that. So we'll see. Now, on the other side, so P2 in the constructors. Oh, last thing on McLaren, they finished with 666 points, 666. Do with that what you will. All right, that has no bearing in the Formula One season, but they finished with 666 points. Do with that what you will. So in P2 was Ferrari, and Ferrari, honestly, um, when the season started, I was high on Ferrari. I'm still high on Ferrari for reasons that if you've been watching the show, you will know. But my friends who are true Ferrari fans were looking at Ferrari as fools. Right at the beginning of the season, you remember me saying, they finally figured out their tire deck situation, and that was like the biggest issue. They finally got their strategy together. That was another issue that they had, and everything was going great until the upgrades that they brought for, it was not Imola, it was Emilia Romagna, the race right before Monaco. They brought these upgrades. Those upgrades were buns. They were ass. They were terrible. And that started basically 2 months of backwards progress for Ferrari. That started a string of terrible races for one Charles Leclerc, right? So he would go on, obviously, after those upgrades, he would go on to win Monaco, which for me was one of the highlights of the season, right? But after that, proceeded to have some really, really, really terrible luck. And yeah, just confirming. Actually, it wasn't. See, this is why you check. Yeah. So yeah, at Emilia Romagna, they brought some upgrades. Leclerc ended up finishing third for that race, which was great. And obviously, the following race in Monaco, Leclerc, Il Predestinato, the Prince of Monaco, whatever nickname you want to do, great. He ended up winning that. But what followed for Leclerc was a string of basically bad luck that did not improve for him until Belgium. But Leclerc had, if I can count it, he was on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 podiums. So 50% of the races, not including sprint race, 50% of the races this year featured a Charles Leclerc on the podium. Yeah. Why am I bringing it up? The reason that I'm bringing it up is that a car with that much consistency, once they did figure out, they reverted back to the original spec, the pre-Imola spec, and then minor upgrades from that point. The car was consistently pretty good. So this bodes well for them for 2025. But what I liked about this race was Charles, because of track limits, started from P19. Um, he was going to start low in the order anyways because he had to take a grid penalty, a 10 place grid penalty, whatever. But the race that Charles had going from P19, he ended up going up to P8. In the first lap, and then ultimately ended up finishing the race P3. So it was a sensational, amazing drive from Charles Leclerc for that race. But what I like seeing out of Charles Leclerc at the end of that race was that he was not happy with the fact that Ferrari was unable to capitalize and win the constructors. I think he wanted to do it one last time for Carlos. I think he wanted to do it one last time because he felt the team at least deserved that. And so you see him post race Abu Dhabi, and it was not a terrible race for Ferrari, by the way, because Sainz obviously finished P2, Charles finished P3, so it's a double podium for Ferrari by all like intents and purposes. It was a great race for them. But one of those guys needed to have finished in P1 and they didn't. And so ultimately Ferrari lost and finished at P2. So at the end of the race, Charles did not look like a happy guy because what is it? What do they say about second place, first loser? And so I like that. For me, I'm a pretty competitive person and I like that spirit in Charles Leclerc. I like to see that, hey, I am not pleased. I'm not content with this. Blah, 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 this, that, and the third. But yeah, it was an amazing race by Charles Leclerc. Obviously, not the only time anybody's ever done it, but for sure the only time I've seen Charles Leclerc do it. Carlos Sainz on the other side of the garage also had a pretty solid race. Obviously, he started the race not in P19, but he was able to capitalize. I don't know what do we want to call the Max Verstappen move. He was able to capitalize on the fact that Max came through, messed that up, and was able to go to second. And basically, it was Lando and Carlos, and eventually Charles for the rest of the race. For Sainz, though, that it's as close to ending on a high note as he was going to get with Ferrari. Obviously, the year has been pretty tumultuous. When it started, Carlos Sainz found out, hey, we're not renewing you. We're going to go with Lewis Hamilton. Sainz obviously would go on to say, like, I understand nobody wants to be replaced, but if I'm going to be replaced, it makes sense that I'm being replaced by the eight-time world driver champion Lewis Hamilton. And there was bits of it that was salty. I think what was weird about Carlos Sainz this season was that, like, while he was looking like for the drivers market, he was linked to so many teams: Red Bull, Mercedes, at one point, I think it was like Haas and maybe Alpine. Almost every team, obviously Audi, Sauber, because of the connections that his dad had. Um, but ultimately, none of those, the bigger teams, right? Like the ones that regularly fight for wins. So like the Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren. Obviously, we're not going to choose him, obviously. But Red Bull and Mercedes represented the highest chance for Carlos Sainz to be able to remain in one of the top teams and still be able to fight for victories. None of those teams went for him. On Red Bull, obviously, the rumor being that there's no way Carlos Sainz Sr. and Jos Verstappen were going to get along. Red Bull already has faced serious turmoil. I can't believe that it's been so long that we forgot about Christian Horner's scandal and the things that he did. Right? That's how long ago that happened, and how people have just basically put it aside. So that was never going to happen. On the Mercedes side, a lot of people linked him because it was like, hey, you can bring in Kimi Antonelli, send him to Williams, put Carlos Sainz in the Mercedes while Kimi gets his rep up, figures out what F1 is, and then you can do a swap. Obviously, like a lot of people were saying that ultimately it didn't make sense either, because that would just leave Carlos high and dry. Like he'd be flailing in the wind at that point, right? Um, so that never materialized, right? Audi was a non-starter. That was the team that made the biggest offer, offered him the most money. But something in that team, something that was going on behind the scenes, whatever it was, Carlos Sainz was not interested, whether it was because Mattia Binotto was on the team, whether because it was because the engine was not anywhere that it needed to be and there was no way it was going to happen. So it's not going to be a competitive car until like, I think Binotto said it wasn't going to be competitive until like 2028. 2028. So Carlos Sainz at his big age of 30 something was going to have to wait until 2028 for that car to be decent. So that's probably why he passed on them. Ultimately, as we all know, Sainz ended up signing with Williams. Now, again, this was for Carlos Sainz the best possible ending aside from P1 in the constructors and P1 in the race. He ended the season on a podium. He ended the season with a win in Australia and a win in Las Vegas. Or a win in Mexico, not Las Vegas. Jesus. Um, anyways, and so he had a great season with Ferrari. Ultimately, it wouldn't have mattered. Now he is off to Williams. All right. So at the time of this recording, Sainz has already done the test, postseason test in Abu Dhabi. They showed some pictures. Obviously, he had all white helmet, all white suit. Great. The pictures from Carlos Sainz that showed him, and if you look at his eyes, it was like, how do I convey, that this car is not as terrible uh, as it seems, right? And I was like, ooh, sorry, Carlos. Uh, anyways, so in his best Stig impersonation, shouts out Top Gear. Carlos Sainz went out there in all white helmet, all white suit, tested the car. Who knows what those times were? Supposedly he topped the time sheets for most of the sessions until the track evolution made the conditions a lot better, and then I think eventually either Antonelli or somebody else was able to get P1. But again, Williams is no Ferrari. Williams is powered by a Mercedes engine. Between now and 2026, maybe Williams gets it together and puts a car together that is at the top uh, of the field, or at least top of the midfield. But yeah, for Carlos Sainz, definitely has to be purgatory. And of course, he hasn't ruled out a return to Ferrari, but I don't see that as plausible unless Oliver Behrman turns out to be like quite terrible with Haas, which I don't really see. If that does happen and Behrman is buns, who knows? Maybe they bring Carlos Sainz back to Ferrari. Otherwise, he's either going to end his career at Williams or eventually going to go to another team. But this will mark, right? He started with Renault, went to McLaren, then Ferrari, and now Williams. And so who knows? Maybe it'll be full circle and he ends up at McLaren again. I don't know. But hey, buena suerte. Now, for the team with the world driver champion, Red Bull. I don't know about Red Bull. Red Bull has been surrounded by controversy to me the entire season, starting with Christian Horner, starting with Helmut Marko, starting with Jos Verstappen. Everything was just very much like everything was a controversy, right? But ultimately, Max Verstappen got it done. Now, this race was, I don't know what Max was thinking. Many of his detractors will say, like, where is this racecraft that you speak of? Because seriously, what the heck was Max doing when he ran into Oscar? And of course, Oscar, in his cool, calm, collective voice, called him out. I forget what he was like. Oh, yeah, that's the move of a world driver champion, that one. So, not that they hate each other, but Max was off the heels of, you know, the beef with George Russell, which is whatever. To me, that beef feels like WWE beef. Like, it's not real. Like, don't talk about it, be about it. Like, if y'all hate each other, cool. If you don't, whatever. But like, this is like dumb. But I will say congrats to him. He is going to be a dad. Found out that girlfriend Kelly Piquet is expecting their first child together. Hey, so that's great. No, seriously, like I don't have anything to say after that. I'm not gonna sit here and clown on an unborn child. That's weird. That's super weird. But for Max, it wasn't that it was a terrible race. It definitely could have been better. Like the Red Bull wasn't disastrous. It didn't have the best race pace, but it was definitely better than the P6 that it finished. But yeah, Max had to play a lot of catch up, right? Lost a bunch of positions, had to come back through the field, through no fault of anyone's but his own. But with that, the season ends and whatever. He is now the Tetra champion of the world. Got 4 under his belt. One very controversial one, but he's got 4 in a row that he got. And so, what we'll see from Max next year, I don't know. Maybe his priorities will shift. Maybe with the arrival of his child, his priorities will shift. I don't actually know at this point. What does Max have to prove? Plus, he's always like, Max is always tempting us with a good time, right? It's always like, when I say good time, he's always like, I'm going to retire. I'm just going to retire from the sport. Like, this is not my whole life. And he's always like taking little like shots at other people who've been in the sports for a really long time. Yeah. I'm looking at Lewis. I'm looking at Fernando, right? And it's just kind of like, Max, either retire or stop talking about it. It's exhausting, dog. It's so exhausting. Please. Anyways, and so he goes off into the off season. We'll see what happens. He's quite over the RB20. So we'll see if the RB21 is any better. They have lost a lot of talent. All of the other teams have figured it out. I'd say their biggest competition, obviously, is McLaren and Ferrari. Not much I can say about Mercedes because, again, as I've said before, Mercedes after 3 years has no idea what the F is going on with their car. Anyways, but yeah, so Max ended up finishing P6 after a terrible, terrible, terrible race start. But on the other side, controversy looms with Checo Perez. Right now, El Viejo Sabroso, like, he got a contract renewal early in the season. Christian Horner would end up saying, like, we gave him that contract as kind of a motivation, which was like, that's dumb. Why? Right? Early in the season, I talked about, like, and I'll post a video, but earlier in the season, I had talked about Checo's in a contract year. And if you watch any other sports, the biggest thing is that anytime an athlete is in a contract year, they tend to overperform, outperform, play inspired, insert whatever adjective you want there, because, hey, they need a new contract. Okay. But then when Horner gave Checo that contract, and I don't know if it was a 1+1 or if it was like a 2, big mistake. Checo's performance this year was terrible. Was it the car? I don't know. Was it a lack of confidence? I don't know. Was it insert X number of reasons? Whatever it was, like, Checo is just not performing, whatever it was. And so probably for the last, honestly, since the summer break, he's been rumored to be losing his seat, be replaced in 2025, and the person who's going to replace him is not Yuki Tsunoda, but Liam Lawson. Now, as the season ended, all the rumors around the paddock surrounding Checo Perez was that, like, hey, he is going to lose his seat. Liam Lawson is going to replace him. Checo is very adamant and defiant about the fact that no, he's not going to lose his seat. He will be back next season, blah, 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 blah. And as it turns out, Red Bull has a decision to make. Apparently, the contract is very, 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 very complex. And so Checo is either going to have to get paid out, right? So they're going to have to pay the remainder of his contract, which is rumored to be anywhere between 16 and 20 million. So call it the Daniel Ricciardo tax, if you will, right? And then they can bring Lawson in, which is a person who has been rumored to replace him again at Red Bull. All of it, honestly, is rumors. We do not know until it happens. But again, the latest one is that it's going to be very, very difficult to get rid of Checo Perez from that seat. But I think Red Bull eventually will find a way because they need somebody to come in behind Max. They don't need somebody to beat him. I mean, that'd be a bonus. What they really need is somebody who can help them win the constructors again. Again, it's going to be difficult for them to do next year because all the teams will have not caught up. Now, going to Abu Dhabi, the race was terrible for Checo because he did not even finish the race, right? Again, it's a performance thing. Formula One is a sport that's very cutthroat. When you're of no use to the team, you're of no use to the team. Full stop. And frankly, me, along with several other people, are really surprised because this is the same Red Bull team that unseated Pierre Gasly midway through a season and put in Alex Albon, only to get rid of Alex Albon. It's the same Red Bull team that kicked out Nick DeVries with 10 races in and said, like, for whatever reason, this team is very cutthroat when it comes to its drivers, but when it comes to Checo Perez, nothing. And so all that lets me know is either like Checo's got the keys to the city, some blackmail, or the money is deep, whatever it is, or Red Bull's driver academy is in such shambles that aside from Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar, they have nobody coming through. And of course, if y'all remember, I think last year, Helmut Marko cleaned house with the Red Bull Driver Academy. Too many drivers, not a lot of talent. Do with that what you will, right? So we'll see. Hopefully by the end of the week, maybe early next week, we'll find out what Checo's fate is. I'm going to be honest with y'all. Stay, don't stay. I just want it to be over. Like, I'm tired of the rumors. Like, stay, don't stay. The only thing that upsets me, obviously, is that Yuki Tsunoda will never get a shot at that Red Bull seat. Again, at the time of recording, he was doing postseason testing for that Red Bull seat, but I think that was more to placate Honda than it was to actually give him a shot. Now, that being said, if Yuki posts some times that are like crazy, shouts out to him. Otherwise, it looks like Liam Lawson is going to be the one who's going to replace him. With that being said, Yuki has beaten all the teammates that have been placed around him. So DeVries, Ricardo, Lawson 1, Lawson 2. Yeah, so we'll see. Anyway, so yeah, that Red Bull's race wasn't super great, but hey, at least they ended up winning the World Driver Championship. It's something. Now, Mercedes. They all weekend had been planning this tribute to Lewis Hamilton, which, like, wow, okay, they did it. They could have been doing this all year. I'm not here to talk about that, right? And instead, this weekend they did that. It sounds like this weekend was the weekend where George Russell was testing out the experimental parts of the car, which, unless I'm misinterpreting, gives credence to the fact that Lewis Hamilton had been testing those parts all year, and that's why the setups, whatever it was not great. That's why he got out qualified, which he called. He said, I'm not going to beat George in qualifying this year. I'm always half a tenth down on him, which it played out, and obviously George outqualified Lewis at a pretty ridiculous stint. I think it was like 20-5 in George's favor, and I think the head-to-head in races, again, George did that. The win that I'm walking away with is that throughout the course of their history as teammates, Lewis ended up outscoring George by 2 points. It's neither here nor there for me. Mercedes decided that they were done with Lewis Hamilton, whether they want to admit that or whether they just wanted him to retire and go with nobody else. Whatever it was, they fumbled it. A generational fumble, right? Regardless, this weekend was one where they were going to do tributes to Lewis, and you saw the car in FP1, FP2, FP3 that was performing pretty decent, pretty consistent. When it came to qualifying, for whatever reason, for whatever freaking reason, they let those two come out super late, and Lewis Hamilton being the last one. He crossed the line with 5 seconds to spare in Q1 and ended up being knocked out of Q1 and P18 because, as luck would have it, Kevin Magnussen, when he was trying to get out of the way, knocked over that baller. That baller got stuck to the front of Lewis's car, no downforce, whatever it was. Lewis is out in Q1. Qualifies P18, and then thanks to some penalties from other drivers, so Alex Albon, Charles Leclerc, starts the race P16. But Lewis had a heck of a race. Started P16, finished the race P4. Basically was an offset strategy. Was the only driver to start with hards, and those tires lasted him for a super long time. When he did finally pit for mediums, there was about 15, 16, I don't know how many laps were left in the race, but he basically had a 14-second gap to catch up to George. And it was a classic Lewis Hamilton masterclass, just being able to cut those times down at basically a second a lap. And then just by the time the final lap came through, he was able to pass George Russell towards the end and finish a race P4, cap off a basically historical career with Mercedes. I think it will be a long time before anybody repeats that level of excellence. Again, generational fumble by Mercedes. All year they had been basically alluding to the fact that he's not fast anymore. He's slow. Every driver has a shelf life. Then they would walk back the statements. And they went out of their way again to make it seem like it was so. But however you want to say that, 2024 saw Lewis Hamilton win 2 races. 2024 saw Lewis Hamilton when given a car that worked, that it was a Lewis Hamilton, or they showed off a Lewis Hamilton that essentially still had it in him. And if you talk to any driver on the grid, all of them are saying the same thing. Lewis still has it. He still has it, right? Don't let these stats fool you. And of course, like, it is not out of the ordinary for a team with an outgoing driver to not focus on the outgoing driver, right? That guy is probably going to have the worst year with the team ever, right? Regardless, the chapter closed with Mercedes. Mercedes, however, is not going to release Lewis out of his contract until December 31st, 2024. And so the first time you will hear anything about Lewis with Ferrari, or I'm sure the first publication, whatever it is, will probably be in January. Hopefully January 1st. I don't actually know. I mean, Lewis's birthday is January 7th, so it'll probably be the first official post. Hopefully it's something before that, but currently Sir Lewis Hamilton is on a goodbye tour with all of the sponsors. He's in Malaysia right now for Petronas. He was in Europe for IWC. These sponsors are going to be weeping. Yeah, I don't actually know. I mean, it is what it is. Again, I'm not going to say much about it at this time, because obviously there's some other stuff I have lined up to talk more about what happened this season with Mercedes. But regardless, the strategy was, well, I believe that obviously if Lewis had qualified higher, if he had a better qualifying, a race win was very, very, very possible. At most a podium, but quite possibly a race win, given how he was out there giving it his all, doing the most, right? But yeah, so official, the end of an era for Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, and yeah, Forza Ferrari as of Gennaio. That's January in Italian, in case you didn't know. Yeah, that's right. No, I'm joking. So yeah, now the team is in the hands of George Russell, Kimi Antonelli, who are both doing postseason testing in Abu Dhabi, and I think they got Kimi doing Super Formula, so he can kind of learn what Suzuka is. One random thing about that, there's a rumor. It's a very offhanded rumor, and again, I doubt this is true, but there's a rumor going around that Carlos Sainz is going to be the driver at Mercedes, and they're actually going to send Kimi Antonelli to Williams. That's BS. Especially considering that Carlos Sainz brought his sponsors with him. So we'll see. But yeah, Mercedes ended up 4-5 with George and Lewis. Lewis 4, George 5. George ultimately ended up winning the race head-to-head as well as a quali head-to-head for 2024. But yeah, Mercedes, I don't know if successfully, but they definitely gave it their all to try and make it seem like, Lewis is getting old. He's not good anymore. Blah, 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 blah. This, that, and the third. But we'll see. I believe the best is yet to come. And when he goes to Ferrari, it's definitely going to be a different situation. Yeah, other than that, some notable things that happened to the race. Valtteri Bottas unfortunately wasn't able to score any points, so that's the end of Valtteri's career in Formula One for now. We may see him with GM in 2026. Who knows? But that is definitely the end of F1 for Zhou Guanyu. I don't know if he'll end up as a reserve driver for any team, but yeah, that's a wrap for that. Aston's finished whatever. The final constructors championship saw, obviously there was a race between Alpine and Haas in order to get that. Obviously each thing represents several $1 million, which is fine. But ultimately Alpine was able to outscore Haas. They got 65 points. Pierre Gasly really held it down. Some of those, obviously that podium in Brazil with Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, second and third, really helped. But yeah, we'll see what happens next year. Again, Jack Doohan is one who has been rumored to only have a 5-race contract. I don't know, but Flavio Briatore is somebody he's cutthroat. All right, Crashgate, do with that what you will. But yeah, the Esteban Ocon story at Haas or at Alpine ended miserably. So he wasn't able to finish with the team, and he obviously has been doing postseason testing with Haas, learning that car. Now, aside from that, Sauber was able to score 4 points last race, and so they finished the year with 4 points. Williams, this marks the end of Franco Colapinto's F1 season, possibly. More than likely will not have a seat next year, which is kind of sad. And I think Colapinto definitely has an upside. He's a fast kid, but definitely made some rookie mistakes, which is to be expected. Got off to a hot start, but it just kind of fizzled out at the end. And unfortunately, he was unable to finish the race. Yeah, so we'll see. But other than that, that marks the end of the 2024 season. It was definitely a very exciting season, definitely more exciting than the 2023. God, it was way more exciting than the 2023 season. Thoroughly enjoyed doing race reviews with y'all and all my guests who came on. As always, please comment, like, subscribe, share, tell your tíos, your tías, abuelos, abuelas, mamis, papis, vecinos, vecinas for the Monoplaza F1 podcast. I'm Virtre. Please look out for all the new content coming during the winter break. And yeah, wait, there's one more. No, that's it. As I said, for the Monoplaza F1 podcast, I'm Virtre. Peace.